Did you know that many people, including Susan B. Anthony, believed that women riding bikes helped lead to women's rights and freedom? In this video, you'll see a lot of different facts, stories, and an interview with a deaf cyclist. If you'd like to see more like this, then click subscribe and share with others. So in 1890, many people believed, including doctors, that if women partook in any physical activity other than dancing, that meant later they would be unable to bear children. Later, that belief did improve and change a bit thanks to all women's schools. They taught women what they call fit for motherhood, where they provided light gymnastics, horseback riding, swimming, boating, ice skating, and later they added biking. Many believed that if a woman had a bike, then it meant later they would become too independent. So often bikes were banned for women. Some people believed that women riding bikes caused their morals and values to decrease and to become worse. But who actually helped break that myth were priests and pastors. And the reason is that churches were often so far from their homes and women would need to travel, but they enjoyed biking, especially on Sundays. So churches allowed them to wear their bike clothes to church, and they set up bike racks near the church so that people could ride their bikes. In 1888, a bike was invented for women specifically because they couldn't have handlebars that were lower lying because of their chest being exposed. So they were upright, and they had a lower mid-bar for their dresses. So today when you see bikes with a lower mid-bar, you know it's because of the women's dresses back in the day. So in the 1850s, women's rights advocate Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she introduced a new clothing style for women, where she took pants that were called Turkish trousers at the time from Turkey and the Middle East, and they were puffed out and they became narrow at the ankle. Well, she paired that with a shorter skirt to be ridden with a bike, and it was deemed the bike outfit. In fact, the bloomer costume. So why were they called bloomers? Well, after a woman named Amelia Bloomer. She worked in a newspaper at the time, and she published an article, and she talked about how that cool bike outfit should be trendy. But it didn't become popular at first. It wasn't a hit. Especially in America, people were concerned that women would forget their role in the household. It wasn't until 1890s that finally people started becoming a little more lax with clothing and realizing that those big dresses were not ideal because they would get stuck in the gears and they would get caught up and cause accidents. Another story that happened, people were shocked to hear that in the year of 1895, the board at College Point, New York, voted to forbid female teachers from riding bikes to school because 3 female teachers liked to ride their bikes to school, and the board saw this, and they were concerned that if they didn't stop this now, nip it in the bud, that it was going to spread to students, and that students would see the bloomer outfit and think it was allowed. Imagine that. Newspapers started to use women on bikes in their advertisements using their bike outfit. And that helped to increase the popularity, and it also helped increase women's interest in riding bikes. In fact, women's fashion changed overall. Corsets were done away with and large hoop skirts, in part thanks to biking. By the end of the 1890s, finally better clothes were being used for women, including better bicycle rights for women. Cycling helped women lead to more freedom. In fact, around the 19th century, more factories were being settled throughout the city, and people were going to work. But because of the crime in the area, people weren't allowed to walk much, especially women and teenagers even. They had to stay in their homes all the time. They couldn't get out to see their friends, and they couldn't get out to see their families that lived far out in the country. But biking settled that. It let them get out and see people. Also around that time, publicly, men were the ones who were always busy going out and about. You always saw them in the public eye. They were more busy doing things, such as being politicians, or involved in the military, or leaders, business leaders, all sorts of other things. Until women had bikes, it changed everything. were able to get out of the home and they were able to go to work, to different jobs, and they were becoming more publicly recognized. And they were increasing in their women's rights. So now that women had a taste of freedom, they wanted to do away with old traditions and they wanted more rights. Even many bike companies in America and other countries started to use a variety of advertisements, but specifically they were including this picture of women with wings and a bike. And the reason is that they were showing how women, now that they had bikes, were able to fly. They were able to fly free. Still, some advertisements did mock women on bikes, but importantly, women really wanted those rights and they fought for it. They fought through it. Now, next up, I have a true story here about how cycling helped women's rights. So there was a woman named Renny and her fiance, Horace Waldron. You see, Horace hated that women were gaining all of these athletic rights. Well, Renny had a brother who had asked him, "Do you want to learn how to bike?" And she took him up on the offer. She even started wearing the bloomer outfit. And she said, in fact, "I don't see any point in wearing skirts anyway. They always bother me and they're always in my way." So she learned how to bike and she fell in love with it. But she felt a little guilty because her fiance, she knew he didn't approve, but she still was biking. So she thought, she'd dream up, maybe I'm going to take my bike and go show up at Horace's work and show him how I can ride the bike, but she always chickened out. And then she realized, I think this is something I need to give up. So she thought, I'll get in one last joyride. I'm going to take it for a ride. And she went through the woods and she was biking through. And she ended up seeing two men and they were talking. And she biked by and she overheard their conversation that they were planning to rob Horace because he had all of this money from his employer for payroll. So they were going to rob and kill him. Renny overheard this and she biked as fast as she could. She rode through, but she saw a train coming, but she barely made it. She zipped on by. She made it to Horace's work. She got there in a state, and Horace was shocked. She had the bloomers, and she's on a bike, and she let him know that he's going to get murdered and robbed. What a shock. It ended up saving his life. Because of that, Horace kind of had a wake-up realization moment that this is actually important. This has a benefit. And so after that he ended up taking up biking and they biked together. Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "The bicycle will inspire women with more courage, self-respect, self-reliance, and make the next generation more healthy in mind and body." Sad and ironic, even though the bike was invented in 1817, women fought and fought and fought until the 1900s when finally society adapted and allowed women to ride bikes. But unfortunately at that point, many factories had changed and shifted to car production. And that started an era of a struggle for women for another many years. Susan B. Anthony said, "Let me tell you what I think of bicycling. I think it has done more to free women than anything else in the world. I stand and rejoice every time I see a woman ride by on a bike." Another true story about a deaf woman cyclist, Dr. Mavis Irwin. She biked her whole life and she was a phenomenal cyclist. Until just recently, when she was diagnosed with a muscle disorder called dystonia. And she's had to reduce her cycling. She used to be amazing at long-distance biking. And she biked for the University of Utah. She was on a team there. And she got her PhD in physiology, the study of living organisms and their functions, science-related. Take a look at the video here. "I have a mild neuromuscular disorder, and cycling is gentler on my joints than running, and more exciting than swimming. I also have always loved those human-powered machines. I was 4 when the neighbors gave me a used, tiny, fixed-gear bicycle. I could not wait to ride it. I had no training wheels, but I was small enough that I could sit on it and barely touch my toes to the ground. My mother told me that I rode and I crashed and crashed to the bike for a few days, but I taught myself how to ride before my parents had a chance to help. In high school, I found a touring road bicycle at the city dump. I fixed it up and I called it my racing bicycle. I used it to bike 23 miles to my deaf school. I was pretty ignorant back then. For 3 high school years, 1 to 2 times per week during the warm weather, I left my house just before 5 a.m. and I gnawed on my plain baked potato for breakfast on the road. I arrived in 2.5 hours to school. I showered in the gym's changing room and I was never late. In high school, I loved to run and participate in track. My senior year, track season ended when my left leg suddenly stopped working. And that was the beginning of my on and off neuromuscular problems. I went to Los Angeles for college. Of course, I took my city dump, pride of a bicycle, with me. I was having problems walking those long distances, and I used it to get around campus. How I miss running. So I joined a cycling club, and I took longer and longer rides. I started racing, and the rest is history. My neuromuscular disorder, especially in the past 3 years, has forced me to do some things differently. But I still like to ride fast like a racer, and more importantly, I can still walk much better than I could in college. If you want to, and you can go from A to B, then just do it. Now with this warmer spring weather, get out on your bike and think of those women who have really taken down barriers for us to bike anytime.